Station 51, engine 27, engine 32, truck 105.
You're listening to The Fire Break with Steve Wolf. Hello and welcome to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, The Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing innovative suppression and containment technology for actually putting out fires. We're not like staring at it from space or ogling it from the ground. We're figuring out how to actually knock it down. Not that we don't need those things too, but at some point, fire has to be dealt with physically because it's a physical thing. I've got Robert Baird with us today, live from California. And Robert brings decades of experience in fire service and fire leadership from numerous agencies. Welcome to the Fire Break. How are you today?
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
So tell me a little bit about your background and how you ended up being in a position of wisdom.
Oh, I don't know if it's wisdom. It's a lot of hard knocks. And I was actually a career infantry officer in the Marine Corps. Later became a plans officer after going to school and getting a degree and getting that specialty. But I was at the Marine Corps University when they were benchmarking the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service. Two individuals, Jim Cook and Larry Sutton, were benchmarking leadership programs. And they showed up to the Marine Corps University and said, how do you guys build leaders? How do you train people to lead in chaotic combat environments? And so that started a multi-decade long discussion about that. And then fast forward through some pretty tough times, Afghanistan deployment, Iraq deployments, and eventually retirement from the Forest Service retirement from the Marine Corps. I transitioned to the Forest Service and had several positions there at the national level, the deputy director for fire and aviation in the Forest Service in the Washington office. I then went down after a detail in Cal Fire for a senior executive fellowship, had 4 months of the deputy director for Cal Fire for fire protection, and then was selected to be a forest supervisor because that's where it really hits the ground, I think, the forest and the district level. And then from there, got selected to be the fire director for the 18 forests in California in Region 5, and did that for about 5 years until 2022. So I'm on my third year of my second retirement. So I'm a retiree failure, Steve, is the problem.
That's funny. And I'm celebrating the 41st anniversary of my 22nd birthday.
Right? Exactly. And we still got stuff to give, right?
Yes, we do.
Knowledge and understanding. And as you said, sometimes you got to slow down to really understand what's going on, because when you're in the heat of it, it's coming at you pretty fast.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for your service. Second of all, tell me about this. You said you spent a long time in the leadership evaluation space. What were the features that made a good leader? And I imagine some of it has to do with what you start with.
Yeah. There's so at the Marine Corps University, they manage the entire structure of development of both officers and enlisted Marines, from lieutenant to general, right? They have the basic school as a lieutenant, your basic captains, majors, all lieutenant colonels, and then finally general officers. And so in that role, I had the unique perspective of watching these different classes, and you begin to see this development paradigm, like, wow, these people are actually moved through their career, and between an operating assignment and a school assignment every 3 to 5 years, they would rotate back and forth. Part of it was for mental and family relief, because the operating assignments are so challenging.
That they needed relief from their family, is what you're saying?
No, they needed reconnection to the family. So there was a lot of reconnecting time as a student. And so a lot of people, so there's continual development in the military, and there's a lot of intellectual energy that happens when you come back. You have all this stuff in your head, and then you can go to school and actually write papers about it. So it was a great thing. I think the leadership program was about, how do you build leadership, and what is it, right?
What is it? That's a great question.
It is. Well, I think it's how you behave, because a leader has to set the example. It's how you treat people, which really starts with respect. And, how do you set example? how are you decisive and making decisions? I used to say the currency of a leader is decisions, right? Do you make decisions or you defer decisions? Do you make people come to you with, how many times has somebody gone to a boss and they're like, no, I need this decision. And the boss is like, well, no, I need more information, or I need this, or I need that, or I need another, wrong rock, bring me another rock. We used to joke in the Marine Corps. And so, watching people go through these programs does that. And so the Forest Service, I'd say, was at a pivotal point where they were trying to benchmark organizations and see where they wanted to build their leadership program. It was the NWCG Leadership Subcommittee, and they were engaging externally. And so that opened up this fascinating partnership and experimentation on, well, okay, if you lay down military leadership, business leadership, and fire leadership, or we'll just say wildfire leadership, what's the intersection of all of those? And it was very, very interesting. And so that actually helped produce the Leading in the Wildland Fire book, the doctrine that's been adopted by NWCG. So, there's a lot of wisdom that came out of that, collective wisdom from a bunch of places, from business, from the military, and from wildfire experience.
That's fascinating. And so what did that Venn diagram look like? What were the influences that made the middle the middle?
Well, what we saw was, and especially I got to go on some inaugural staff rides. And a staff ride is when, back to, Civil War and Napoleonic times, they would ride their staff out on horses and overlook the battlefield. And they would say, this is how my vision, the commander's vision for the battle unfolding. And it would be with the staff, so that the staff would then understand, well, this is the way the commander sees this happening. You've probably seen this in a bunch of movies, right? Where, the Roman general is like surveying what's going to happen, and it's true. And so it allows the staff, the subordinate commanders, and that commander to understand that environment. It's later been called by the Army doctrine as the commander's battle space area evaluation. And that battle space, here's how this is going to go down. And but more importantly, the commander's got to decide, here's how I'm going to take him down. It's no different than getting into a confrontation with somebody. Here's how I'm going to take him down, to a large scale operation. Here's how we're going to crack this problem. And so we were able to do that for Man Gulch, actually, believe it or not, and Little Bighorn. And so it was fascinating for the Marines to go study Little Bighorn, because it wasn't a Marine battle, one.
Right.
And two, it was a tragic loss, unfortunately, for the soldiers that were involved. But out of that loss, you can learn a lot of lessons. Same with Man Gulch, right? So Man Gulch was a underestimation of the fire's behavior. The fire unpredictably, fire behavior overwhelmed them. They lost their decision ability, their ability to make decisions. I think it's been called now a collapse of decision making, and they lost options. And when you lose options, you lose. And so the same thing happened on Little Bighorn, right? They thought that the Native Americans were going to do this, and they decided to not do that, and they did something unexpected. The Army was then in a reactive mode. And so there were a lot of commonalities between Man Gulch and Little Bighorn, that a commander, whether it's Wag Dodge or Custer, has to go, oh, okay, I didn't see that coming. So, and then business, Steve, I looked down, I think, on business people when I was in the military. Oh, that's not complex. Oh, that's not challenging. Or, oh, that's not a hard decision. And then we had Wharton Business School people there, and under some of the guidance of Dr. Mike Useem, who's done Leading Up and some of the really great leadership books. And they ended up bringing the Wharton students to the Marine Corps for a weekend and put them through officer training. So they got to see what it was like to either produce or not produce, or be promoted, not be promoted. Nothing better than a Marine Corps gunny in your face to remind you to produce, right? And
Yeah, right.
you're either accomplishing the mission or you're not. And so there were a lot of commonalities there. And that was kind of the genesis of this leadership program, and where we really had a really great run with that.
I'm curious about the opposite, because we often do look at wildfire attack, as we call it attack, right? Battle the blaze, right? We have all this military terminology against something that's not actually the enemy. It's a natural phenomena. And we're never going to beat wildfire, because wildfire predates us and will post-date us. What we're really just trying to focus on is diminishing wildfire devastation of the built environment.
Yep, absolutely.
And so to what degree, does getting into a military mindset maybe, blind us to other ways, or maybe more effective ways of looking at it?
So it does. I believe, in having been a forest supervisor of a forest that's really challenged in Central California, the Los Padres, and I mean challenged environmentally, overuse, too many people, which is great because they love it, right? It's Big Sur, it's over Santa Barbara, right? It's a beautiful area, but the agency was not designed for visitor usage like the Park Service is, and doesn't have that resourced as well in the areas of recreation. I've had a lot of discussions over the years with people who presume that because there's words like initial attack, air attack, attack, that you're attacking blindly, or you're attacking without regard to your people. And that's entirely not the case. And you're also attacking to win. So you have to find, back to the commander's evaluation of the battle space, you got to find the way to win. And we don't attack tornadoes. We certainly don't attack floods, but we learn to, manage them. And part of that could be a great defense, right? Some of the greatest battles are defensive battles where, it takes almost a 3-to-1 to beat someone defensively. So now that rolls into the analogy of community hardening, home protection, right? Structure defense. And so sometimes you got to, pick your battle. But I don't think any military commander, incident commander, or fire chief wants to lose anybody going into anything. And
right.
So I think, but there's an interesting thing there about the psyche, Steve, which is there a hero psyche that is not helpful, right? Don't we all want to watch that wildfire roll off the hill toward the community, hit a shaded fuel break, and go out, right? Not
Sure.
harm any homes, not have to call out any engines, not have to bring in any aircraft, not have to spend gazillions, 8 or 10 times more for the suppression than you would for the fuels work or the fuel break or the home hardening, but we do. And we seem to do it a lot. And we do it pretty well in America. And when you see what other countries are doing, you begin to understand, wow, is that really, I don't know if that's a winning strategy. It's not. We got to learn to live with fire. We got to harden ourselves and be defensive. Look at things like the Iron Dome, right? Or these dome, using, let's say, an Israel wharf analogy, they protected themselves defensively. So how do we do defensiveness in communities? I think that's where technology can come in and help communicate risk, right? And leaders have to be good communicators. They have to know how to engage well, engage respectfully, meet people where they are, and try and bring them up, right? Nothing worse than a leader that talks down to their people and either belittles them, berates them, or disrespects them in some way. And so I think The future is going to be visualizing risk and communicating risk through many of the systems out there that are visualizing wildfire risk into communities, right? And what's the concept? NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. It's
Yeah.
not in my backyard until you go, oh, wow, look, I can't get insurance. My home's at risk. My community's at risk. Do you actually mobilize the community? And they say, hey, we need to do something,
Yeah. So this skill that people are developing of visualizing risk is really based on the idea, if we could show people in a way that they can understand, then they will be educated enough to make decisions in their best interest.
And I don't necessarily believe that, let's say you and I have a different view on something. I often think it's the perspective. And my wife would joke, you got to put on your perspectacles and look at it from the other person's view. And
yeah,
so it's simply where your background may be different than my background, and you're looking at the problem differently. And I often would receive a lot of criticism in California as the fire director when we were asking for more resources, and NMAC, or these organizations that are trying to coordinate and prioritize among regions for resources. We're saying we need more in California. We need more. We need more. They're like, we're out. We're like, we need more. We need more. Bring in the military. Okay. Bring in the Australians. Okay. Bring in the New Zealanders. Okay. Bring in Mexico. Okay. Who else you got? And they're like, well, Canada. And we're like, bring them in. It doesn't. So when you're on the ropes and you're being beaten up, you're going to ask for any help you can get.
Yeah.
And often my colleagues in other regions or in other areas of the country where they're not on the ropes, they have terrain to their advantage and have landscapes aplenty without communities. There's areas of the Los Padres where a community is adjacent to a wilderness. And I'm talking like Carmel, right? Not a community, like that kind of community with, significant property values at risk. In Southern California, there's communities that are adjacent to national forests that fire could roll down in one afternoon, several hours or less, right, with a great run. And so when you're having that much at risk, you're going to ask for as many resources as you can. And it's not about wasting them or hoarding them, but you're trying to deal with epic structure losses and loss of life. When you look at the campfire, Steve, 85 souls lost in a morning? Like, how's that good? And
right.
That was purely defensive, right? Think about that. That was a real challenge to get behind that weather phenomenon. But to your point, it was a weather phenomenon. That fire was an aspect of the weather, and we have to decouple. I'm going to fight this thing. The hard part is you got men and women who are doing heroic actions, and I mean
absolutely
heroic actions, and they need to be resourced. They need to be trained. They need to be developed. They need to be supported. They need a living wage in California. They need all that you would expect you would want of a military member to have. They need counseling for PTSD.
Yes.
They need monitoring for smoke inhalation. They need a disability program, right? I mean, you can just go on and on and on.
Right.
And those programs, while they were moved forward a lot, I was very pleased with the You Will Not Stand Alone that turned into some of the mental health programs that were launched and peer support that was launched, and even doing memorials for the fallen and having the fire service and the federal fire service, the land management agencies acknowledge the value in memorializing the fallen and recognizing their sacrifice. They recognized it, but how do you memorialize it well and show respect? So there's a lot to that leadership, right, that is part of being in those organizations.
Yeah, not just to memorialize it, but to learn from it, because so many lessons can be had from these these tragedies that can minimize the likelihood that they happen to someone else.
Great point, Stephen. The Federal Fire Service was cataloged many fatalities. And after usually we had a staff ride in the Southern California that followed the development of changes to federal fire policy after every fatality fire, right? After this fire, you have the 10 standard fire orders. After this fire, you have LCES. After this fire. So we began to see, okay, well, how do we get ahead of that? Do we really have to keep losing people to get better? Like, can't we just go do these? So the power of a staff ride in the modern sense of where it's gone is you take people out who've never experienced it. They're walking on the terrain. You're putting them in the environment of the leader at the time, and you're asking them, what would they do? Not what would they do with hindsight bias, but now you're the leader at the time. What are you going to do? And there's power in that to have people learn in an anticipatory way from these fires, because those white crosses out there that are all over the nation from fallen firefighters out in these places, if they're not recognized, memorialized, and alive with going back for people to see the lessons, that's when you honor the fallen, right? Is when you extract the lessons and you pass them on.
Yes. Very, very interesting. To what degree do you think that our need for reinforcements when we're, in the thick of it, influences where we think the shape of the battle should be? So when demand for electricity is extremely high, 50 years ago, it's like, well, the problem is we don't have enough coal miners and we need more shovels. And as electrical demand, continues to climb, more shovels, without ever saying like, oh, well, maybe there's alternatives to digging in the mine. Maybe there's alternatives to coal. And we're so fixed on how to accelerate the capabilities of the current technology that we're missing out. Like, oh, well, if you're just looking for more shovels, you're never going to invent solar or wind or nuclear or tidal or other options.
So you're quite an innovator, right? And you see innovation and have leveraged and fielded technology. So this may resonate with you. My last job in the Marine Corps was at the Center for Irregular Warfare, and this would have been 2010, 12. The Marine Corps was trying to understand irregular warfare includes both counterterrorism, foreign internal assistance, and counterinsurgency. And what was recognized was, whoa, these aren't the wars we've always fought, right? Post 9/11. Right. So there's a strategic acknowledgement, whoa, this isn't what we thought we were in. And the name of the organization is called the Marine Corps Combat Development Command. And in that Combat Development Command, it's a deputy commandant for capability development and integration. And that deputy commandant is considered, in many ways, fighting the future battle is the way they would speak to it. So there's the current operational forces that are out in the Marine Corps going out and doing things. They're aboard ship. They're on exercises. They're prepared to go do things. They're training. They're building capacity. They're taking care of their people and moving forward. And then there's this, well, what's this deputy commandant doing? And they're developing future doctrine, right? So they're coming up with the ideas. Then they're looking at what's the capability out there that can change the doctrine. For example, can we do a tilt rotor aircraft that can fly like a plane and land like a helicopter? Gee, wouldn't it be nice if we could have both of those? Hey, right. Industry, go figure that out.
Yes.
And guess what? It's painful, but industry figures it out, right? And so that birthed a whole new set of maneuver and doctrine and operations where no longer did the Marine Corps believe it was going to land at the beach like it did in Normandy, right?
Right.
It said, we're going to do ship to objective maneuver. We can bypass the beach and go all the way to airfields or cities or whatever. But it takes this capability development and integration piece where, let's say you have a new piece of equipment that you've invented. The Marine Corps would receive it. It would say, well, is there a need for this? And we saw this a lot recently in the counter ID world, right? Where it wasn't worth that. This analogy comes over to the fire service, to your point, right? Where, well, who's organizing the new inventions of the fire service? Who's helping build what these are? Who's making sure it interoperates with other departments? I mean, counties can't even interact, let alone feds, state,
Right.
right? I mean, everybody's on their own thing. And I think some of people you've had on, I think it was Chief Roper, who I knew from when I was down there in near Ventura County and in his past work, he talked about lowering silos, right? So how do you become interoperable? You can't be a coalition if you're on your own program.
Right. By definition.
By definition. And so how do we build coalitions in the fire service, lower our individual egos maybe? How do we look toward interoperability? I believe that's the future. One agency, department, whatever can't do it.
No.
So is the answer federalizing and unifying? I don't know. I'm not going to touch that one because
That's what it's going to right now. As of this week, that's what's happening, right? They're collapsing several agencies into one.
So, and I wrote a post about that just yesterday. So I've been thinking a lot about that. Are you trading one set of problems for another?
Of course.
Right. Government's never, government knows how to shuffle problems, right?
Right.
So, okay, 9/11, we had a failure. We created DHS. Did that solve the problem? I don't know. It created new problems.
Right.
Is unifying a federal fire service going to solve the problem? It could hurt the land management agencies immeasurably. And to your point, you got to have fuels, healthy forests, and healthy ecosystems to have the fires not be rampaging. But is there a short-term thing where we gotta acknowledge the world we're in, and deal with what the problem we have in front of us, not some ideal that's out there. So it may allow the land management agencies to do better, focus more, and not have the pull of their workforce. Go to fires, go to land management, go to fires, go to land management.
Right.
Hopefully they can be land managers during a fire, because here's the shocker, right, Steve? There's good fire out there.
Yes.
And there's fire we want to live with and promote. And so how do we, wouldn't that be amazing if the tech, which I believe it can, show us, well, that burn is actually at a level that's positive. Like that burn out there that we're looking at from space is at a level that's going to be healthy, restorative, and going to provide a benefit to the watershed, all the little plants and animals out there, right? And, I never got an ecosystem degree, but plants and animals, right? And watersheds. And if you understand the importance of them, because parts of the Los Padres were, so fire damaged that the sides of they were burnt slick, right? They were incinerated, and then the water was coming later and washing it all and silting in watersheds. So you look at, I think it's Lake Cachuma, the watershed filled up, silted up, they built another one. The watershed silted up, they built, right? And so we're like, okay, this is insanity. We're doing the same thing.
Yeah. Right. And now we have, the phenomena of the opportunistic prescribed burn. Right. We never could have got permission to have this burn, but now that it's going, we're going to keep it and manage it.
Slippery slope, right? Are you messing with nomenclature, and are you using, part of it comes back to the funds used, part of it is the resources. So if if the organization around a prescribed burn and a escape joke, the escape prescribed burn had this level of organization. We called in all this stuff because it escaped. Why didn't the prescribed burn have the same level of stuff, people, equipment, resources? And
Right.
the answer is funding constraints, right? So everybody's trying to do as much as they can with costing as little as they can. But often it was around the organization, meaning the incident management that was occurring. And that too was done on a shoestring, right? Where prescribed burn monitoring and resources were limited. And those escapes are not good for the public. They're not good for the agencies. They're not good, right? Because they lose credibility and
they create a fear around doing something that we actually should be doing.
And they allow and drive politicians to make unilateral actions. You look at Colorado where, fire is moved out of land management, natural resources into some kind of organization. Colorado did that. And they did it after an escape prescribed burn, right? Governor Hickenlooper unilaterally changed it to be under public safety, right? And I don't see any problems with Colorado's fire protection organization. They seem to be innovating. They seem to be well-resourced. They seem to understand natural resources processes. They've recruited quality people in leadership positions that are communicating well to their constituencies, and they're innovating at the same time as they're understanding prescribed burns and healthy forests and how the ecosystem has to be to prevent catastrophic fire. So it may not, right? If you look at that, some people argue, well, other agencies have had to come back around. Like some were critical of Cal Fire more than I've necessarily been, where they had to turn into a high suppression capable organization. Well, you can't blame them. That's their mandate and what they're built to and what their threat is. Back to, they had a future that they were reaching toward and a mission that they're trying to solve. And it was a suppression centric mission. At the same time, look at what they've done for fuels work and prescribed burning. And they're engaging in the space now, especially as of the last several years. So the leadership is able to manage both. I think it's spinning a couple plates, and that's never easy.
No, it's not. And, we tend to have a bias towards the heroic actions, even if the heroic actions were the result of preventable conditions.
Isn't that fascinating?
Right. So, it's that, my nutritionist gets no credit and my oncologist gets all the credrit. Wait a minute. If I'd have listened to this guy more, we wouldn't need that guy. So we have some aspect of
that gave you help after you had a heart attack. He saved you after your heart attack. But the dietitian who's telling you to stop eating all that got no credit. Right. But,
right.
Surgeon, you're miraculous. You healed my heart condition. Well, okay. Like, what did we go through? And that's a great analogy, right? Because so how do you bring that forward, right? How do you help people vision what is possible? And I think some of the situational awareness tools, building decision making and getting alignment around some of these things are important.
Yeah, and part of it seems to just be endemic to being American. We have a different concept on physics versus philosophy.
Well,
and right, if we were in Europe and the cities are very close to each other, and the possibility of a burn moving through 100 miles is going to devastate several cities, but here, you could go 1,000 miles and not come across a city, right? They have a different value on prevention.
Yeah.
And it seems that in America, there's, no money for prevention, but endless money for response, because response is heroic, and, funding heroic responses gets you reelected.
Yeah, you're hitting some third rails, Steve, right? Like, is there a bias towards, is there a dysfunction toward that? And it frustrates those that see the future and know that we need a resource ecosystem health. However, we're deriving it ideally through prescribed burning, right? My first job at the national level, I didn't understand how the Forest Service behaved. I understood how it was organized.
Right.
Headquarters in Washington, all the regions run forests. I'm like, okay, chain of command, I got it. And then all of a sudden I was like, well, what's that region doing whatever they want to do? Like, who are you? Like, what do you think? How come that forest is doing whatever they want? Like, what? And so I got to see the brilliance of they have to manage the land locally. And land is different, right? In Florida, where they burn like crazy for prescribed burning. I use the term social license, Steve, where they have social license to do prescribed burning in Florida. And I used to say, hey, you prescribed burning people in Florida need to come out to California and try and do the same thing you're doing and get a news helicopter, right? You got 10 news helicopters for the first smoke, right? In the first 30 minutes.
Right.
You got multiple, the initial attack resources are probably a helicopter or two, a large air tanker, right? 10 or 12 engines, a battalion chief, right? Any smoke in the air has this response. I'm like, that's not social license. You can't translate that model here. So I was a big fan and passionate about having a prescribed fire training center west.
Oh, wow. Great idea.
Where they were taught not only there's the mechanics of a prescribed burn, there's how to do it, but boy, you got all this public out here that you have to interact with differently in the West. And, I had a congresswoman on the forest that had been fire scarred, right? And so, I appreciated her because she was very interested and wanted to support, but she was fire scarred, like literally calling after a start on the front country of Santa Barbara. Yet at the same time, I saw how those fires behaved, and they rolled up and just wiped out communities, right? I mean, just right. And you've seen it. I think this discussion about mega fire action is important too, because it's going to take mobilization. They talk about largest mobilization, the likes of we had during World War II. And I absolutely agree with that. And so if a new agency can get more attention, can help with a whole of government approach, because commerce has a part to play, right? Standards and technology has a part to play. There are these other areas that really could enable the cohesive strategy as it was envisioned, and help us as a nation learn to figure this out, instead of letting everybody sort it out on their own with very little efficiency.
Yeah. Well, now that you are an independent consultant and you don't have an agency determining what you can and can't or should or shouldn't focus your efforts on, so you have the freedom to address this problem, which I imagine will be a lifelong passion of yours. Where have you decided that you can have the most impact, and through what type of actions?
A great question, Steve. Thank you. I think you many times growing up in the Marine Corps, you're in this structure, and while you probably no different than the fire service, right? You're in the structure. You got a captain, a battalion chief, right? Then you got your chief. This is your organization. You're loyal to the organization. I think I went from the Marine Corps, but what was interesting about the Marine Corps is officers are appreciated and not vilified for being critical of things that could be done better. And so leaders were taught moral courage. And the moral courage, and in fact, if people look at Leading in the Wildland Fire Service, that doctrinal publication about leading, it has 2 chapters, leading up and moral courage. Leading up means I'm going to help lead my boss and deliver to them what makes them able to make a decision, no problem. I've thoroughly thought it out. I've war gamed it for them. I've thought of all the permutations, and it's easy to make them say yes. And I want to help them say yes. I don't blame them for indecisions or, needing information. They have a different view. And the more I can look at the world from my boss's view, the better we both are. Moral courage is to stand up and really not shout, not, ceaselessly complain, but figure out how to advocate positively for change in the organization. And many of the changes I saw in the federal fire service were grassroots efforts that were allowed to continue because they didn't totally create antibodies. And so how do you help with that? Peer support, for example, became a cadre of You Will Not Stand Alone that then became a program that then became funded once the agency acknowledged it. So how do we accelerate those improvements is something I'm interested in and helping them, because when you're in the fish tank, you don't often see how muddy the water is or cloudy the water is. You're trying to swim and survive and just trying to get the next thing done. And so the ability to be retired is great. I think helping them do deep thinking about specializing in things. The world's changing, and I'm not sure we've grappled with AI and machine learning in the fire service. I think people probably use it for their emails and how to answer something and how to look something up. Like it's the modernish Google, right? It's replaced Google for tell me about this or tell me about that and whatever. But it will fundamentally, in my opinion, change the landscape of decisions. And the question will be, when that future fire chief, and who's now a firefighter, there's that fighting term again, but will they understand how to leverage this capability to its fullest extent? Will they learn to trust and have it be like your gauges on your dashboard of your car? You trust if you have a check engine light, or you trust your tach or your speedometer. Well, the systems, again, if properly organized, oriented, and built, could show you, hey, you're almost out of engines. Hey, your firefighters have been on for 22 hours. Hey,
right.
You're redlining, you're out of aircraft, and you need to adjust your things. I believe I've seen some of the work that was done early with FireGuard and satellite detections, and through X's work with Bellwether. Their work is phenomenal. And when you get selected for Time's Innovation of the Year, it's a pretty good endorsement that you're a game changer. And so how does the people out on the fire ground begin to leverage that? How do the organizations, the people who make decisions in these agencies, how do they roll this in so it's not disruptive, but additive, right? Change can often bring a dip, right, of capability when there's a little bit of chaos and reorganization, but how do you make it additive? And I think there's ways to do that. So that's what I've been focusing on, is implementing these technologies and these advancements, futuring out. So maybe I'm defaulting back to my capability development and integration roots that I was steeped in for several years with a problem. Counterinsurgency was not a problem where you're gonna, here's a great analogy. You can't kill and capture your way out of a counterinsurgency. There's bigger issues going on, political, social, lack of jobs, right? There's things that are happening in that society to cause those people to pick up arms, let alone you're seen as an occupying force. Okay.
Right.
And the same thing with fire, right? How can we get people to see this differently, and how can we get them to want to adapt? I think they want to adapt. I think they want to change and leverage technology. I see in my unique experience, having been part of these think tank world where it's unconstrained by resources. A lot of people in the agency would probably laugh at hearing this. The chief technology officer went bananas in the Forest Service that we in Region 5 had an agreement with Google X. Well, don't you understand? They're trying to make money. I'm like, okay, first off, this organization couldn't even do a contract if they wanted to. They're a think tank. Like, this isn't the Google you're worried. This isn't the Alphabet. These aren't the big, it's
These
not,
are not the droids you're looking for.
these are not the droids I tried the Jedi mind trick and it didn't work, but he was worried about his perspective, which was network security and network access. When we got to agreement about, well, this is public data, this is data that belongs to the citizens of the United States, like, we should be able to provide this to any startup who is seeking to derive, to change and develop their AI and ML models, right?
Yeah.
Because let's face it, we've all used AI and ML and we've been like, well, what's the thing of that, right? Well, how did you get that? Like, and you know why? It's because we haven't trained it. It's no different than when we talk to our dog and say, sit, and it lays down, right? It's got to be trained.
It's not the dog's fault, right?
It's not the dog's fault. So you got to begin to train it and develop it. And so watching that process and being the fireside with I had a tremendous staff in Region 5 of highly qualified people in fire and aviation, and they were just all excited about seeing what could happen with this and interacting with them. So you don't want a technologist over here in a stovepipe. You want a technologist to deal with a practitioner. And that, in my opinion, is the magic. So if I can help in this new role about bringing the practitioners and the researchers together, there you go, right?
I was thinking about the undertrained dog, with the examples that you gave for AI, I mean, the check engine light and the tachometer and whatnot. And I thought, well, those are just data inputs. That's not decision making. If we're really using AI, the AI would take all of that data and then tell you what to do with it. And it would say, hey, your car's working great, but you need to be reminded that you need to drive to the store to pick up your wife's birthday present.
Exactly.
And now the AI is helping you, right? Not just feeding you data. But in terms of the decision process of wildfire suppression, right now there seems to be a bias towards just giving incident command more and more and more data. No, we're not going to look at it from the ground ourselves. We're going to look at it with these cameras, and then we're going to look at it from the sky, and then we're going to use sensors. And I think ultimately this is just going to create a data overload and not lead to better decisions. Whereas AI could actually be making decisions. The AI says, okay, you've got these helicopters and these, type 1 trucks and these type 6 trucks, and here's the capabilities of each one. And I'm going to use what I know about the capabilities of every asset, to play chess in real time against the fire in a way that this can't do.
Well, and this goes to the concept of decision support, Steve. And, I, coming out of the Marine Corps that had real-time decision support. And then the concept of intelligence. So we're using these terms, intelligence, which is just information, right? So at the broad scope, as my understand definitionally, data is data. That's the raw, that's these dots on these screens, right? The information is what's floating out there, what's being said, right? The intelligence is someone listening to this, an AI recording, hearing this, and it's tailored for a listener that says their important things are this, their priorities are that. And the AI is pulling out of this data and this information what's most important to that decision maker, whether they need to do that. And fireground decisions often are, right, attack, withdraw, burnout, right? Seek a different defensive location, and it can be done, and it
Yeah.
needs to be modeled. We're missing some things. So we're missing the real-time nature of satellites. With Modus and Virus every 12 to 24 hours, it was terrible.
Aurora Tech is getting us up to 20 minutes now.
Aurora Tech's moving out. The FireSat constellations launching. Kudos to that whole effort. FireGuard is on track with dual use technologies for DoD satellites. So you now have that solved. The other part of the equation or the triangle of future fire is, well, where are my people, right? Where are the engines? Where are the helicopters? Where are the assets? Because if you know where the fire is, you got to orient your people to not where it's been, but where it's going to be decisively.
Right. Yep.
To the battle analogy, I got to find the decisive point to where they need to connect. And that is a futuring exercise. So I have to look forward and envision. So getting the technology to help leaders vision out 12, because face it, Steve, there's a lot of decisions that are made that are already happening, and they don't understand that that's already happened. They're trying to make a decision on something that they have no control over. By the time the incident commander gets through ops, gets down to a division, gets down to a captain, to a module that says turn right.
Right. You already missed the turn.
You missed the turn, right? It's kind of Black Hawk Down scenario, right? Where you're trying to communicate through these layers. I think, I don't think that, they prioritized fires. I believe AI could prioritize fires for resources for us.
Absolutely.
Here's the values at risk. Here's how many structures are at risk. Here's the fire future. Here's the weather, right? Weather we can measure, right? We're good at weather measurement.
Yeah.
But we have not employed the Dingle Act, Steve, that says that every firefighter should be tracked. And that was not passed lightly. Congress doesn't pass legislation that doesn't actually mean something. So I'd love to see the Dingle Act resourced, where engines, hand crews, aviation, and incident command had situational understanding. And even if it's blue dots, the military had Blue Force Tracker 30, 40 years ago, 30.
Yeah, right.
Am I dating myself? 30 years ago, right? Post Desert Storm. So I think the fire, whether state, federal, whatever, deserves that. I think that should be part of the new, if it's unified, data standards and data interoperability, no different than iPhone and IBM or whatever.
Macs and Windows, right?
Yeah, Mac and Windows. So I think helping people see these futures and helping companies navigate how to posture, because it doesn't always go right. And unfortunately, the last company I was in who was fielding a second retardant, which was more environmentally friendly, it wasn't integrated well. There were challenges that should have been foreseen with experimentation. But it isn't the company's, that's the agency has to manage its program. And so how do you help companies like that don't outrun their capital investments, that don't decide we can't make any money at this when they might have the next solution out there. So I'm trying to help companies look toward how do they get a glide path and interact with the agencies well, because I still trust and respect my colleagues who are in the fire service, who are really taking some beatings.
Yeah.
And many are undeserved, because if the fire service is fiscally conscious, hardworking, and I believe the taxpayers are getting their money's worth out of the federal fire service, especially as poorly as some of the junior firefighters are paid. I mean, that was one of my greatest frustrations, was not looking at my junior firefighters in California and trying to get them above minimum wage. And I'm like, why am I even having this conversation? Like, what is wrong here? Like, can't you see it? Well, That's not federal minimum wage. I'm like, I don't care. Like we
They
need
got to live. Yeah.
I need a living wage. I want to attract talent. And so how do you do that? And so I think reflecting more about that and taking the time to help others that are on this journey of innovation, trying to lead into innovation and into the future, because I think the future's bright, Steve, as long as we help it forward and use some of these technologies well.
Which I think we will, because we'll run out of alternatives. I want to ask you one last question, and that is why what do you think we allocate resources so differently based on what the source of the devastation is rather than the quantity of the devastation? Right? 9/11, we lost, 5 buildings, 4,000 people, and we responded with how many $100 billion,
Oh,
right?
and lives.
Whatever that money was used for, and then we lose 16,000 structures in LA, and no one's talking about why we shouldn't be throwing more billions of dollars into wildfire technology. Now, I mean, because the way I think of it, dead is dead. It doesn't really matter whether a terrorist did it or a domestic fire did it. And loss of structure is a loss of structure, whether someone came over here and blew it up or whether it burned down in a fire. Why does if an enemy did it, it gets this massive economic and technological response? And if it happens domestically, well, that was just a fire. We throw nothing at it comparatively.
I think you're onto something, Steve. And the question is, can these current agencies, advocate on their own behalf? I think you're seeing the blue rib or the president's commissioner but we've done commissions before. We've done blue ribbon things before. The question is, are we going to put our money where our mouth is?
Right.
The regional forester, way back when it was a district forester in the 1920s, a guy named Coert de Bois had been an army officer and then became the regional forester during World War One, went off. And he came back and he wrote a book called Systematic Fire Protection for the California Forest. And I'm like, I'm the fire director. I should probably read this book, Systematic Fire Protection for the California Forest. And you know what he starts off with? This is an economic problem. What is the public willing to pay to protect their forests and their the timber, the forest, the watersheds, and the communities? It is a simple mathematical problem, like that, clear and stark. And
Wow.
and it's like, wow, this is a powerful idea, because what's it worth to the public? There are some communities, Montecito, I think, comes to mind, who are voluntarily paying extra taxes, right?
Yeah.
We're willing to pay more taxes to get a helicopter sitting right up there where we know it's going to respond. The challenge is people don't see themselves in a fire escape. Insurance is a relatively new player, 5-ish years, maybe 5-10 years. And utilities are game changing this, because they're now saying, no, I'm sorry, Steve, your property is in a fire shed and we're not going to insure you. That's not a solution either. It should be discussed. Okay, community, we see you in a fire shed. How do you help get better? But I think, unfortunately, this is going to cost a lot of money. And the futuring is either you're going to pay for it and you're going to prevent it, or you're not going to invest in it and not get a return on investment from the nation's investment in its structures and protection. I'm amazed you triggered something. When I was at the Marine Corps University, you're supposed to write a thesis on a future war scenario. My future war scenario in 2006-ish was terrorists are going to use arson to take down the nation's forest with wildfire.
100%.
Wrote it in 2006. Why? I had gone on staff rides of the Cedar Fire, actually, in SoCal. You probably near that. And the Cedar Fire, to me, looked like an atomic bomb went off. it literally, because I've been through some of those classes, Cold War classes, I'm dating myself, to understand what that looked like. And so to see the force unleashed because of the weather, it's like that. And so do not have a handle on human caused fires, let alone malicious arson fires, let alone terrorism in the forest, in these fires. Our data systems are not connected. The federal arson investigators are not connected to state and locals often. They are interactively, but not data wise. And once you begin to see cause and origin data analysis on a broad scale, you can look for trends. So that's out there and it's real. And there's a lot that's been written about that. If people are interested in that, I can send you a link to what I've written. But that's where we need to understand, no different than the Japanese launched fire balloons across during World War II, right? Look at what
and we did in Germany.
Yep. We're focused on Germany. The Japanese are launching fire balloons into the Pacific Northwest that were meant to hold forces on the continental United States. And that was why this huge mobilization, it's all documented. And actually, oddly enough, was stifled because the War Department didn't allow people to talk about it until, unfortunately, a family was killed who walked up on one of these devices and it detonated. And then you see this shift. So if that's the mechanism of, if people need fear for action, there's a lot out there that they can understand. Because anybody in the fire service, when you begin to talk to them about, well, what if you have a deliberate arsonist out there who understands red flag warnings, who understands how this all works, like some unfortunate firebugs are also firefighters. Sometimes it happens. If these people are deliberate, planned, and concerted, that is something we are not ready for.
No, it's one terrorist with a match can take out an entire military base or an entire city, no doubt. And to the degree that we can start to perceive wildfire as a military threat, then it will start to get funded the way we fund other military threats. Right, and that's where I think we'll see the big technological gains that will then trickle over to civilian firefighting.
Great point. That's exactly it. And if people can visualize that and understand it, there was a lot of hesitancy in the Forest Service about talking about this. And I was like, well, not talking about threats doesn't make them go away. Like it was, having been in defense where you're always threat oriented and you're always trying to anticipate threats, it blew me away that people weren't thinking about human caused fire, or 9 out of 10, 8.5 out of 10, especially in the West. I mean, you occasionally have a lightning bust, but it's all human caused. I was amazed on a forest in Central California, how many were human caused. A lot of it's negligent, but it's not
a big leap.
Not a big leap. And so how do we harden the communities then? So, the forest burns. How do we make that burn as positive as possible? But then how do we protect our communities? And I used to think something bad's going to have to happen before we're going to have a sea change. And I have seen so many bad things I can't.
They keep happening and the change doesn't happen.
And I don't understand what's wrong with us. And so how do we talk about these uncomfortable things? I'd rather talk about the uncomfortable piece first. Like, hey, Steve, you just had a, hamburger, you have a heart condition, right? That's an uncomfortable conversation.
But if I don't look at my cholesterol numbers, I don't have to worry.
Exactly. But it's better than knowing that you got to it's a loving conversation too, right?
Yes,
if somebody
absolutely.
confronts you like, hey, I care about you, and you're doing something that's not healthy, that's going to harm you in the long term. I would think we could have that mature conversation, but not
Don't
around.
worry, I happen to be on a plant-based diet, so.
But not around fire. I'm probably more indicted on that one, but not on a plant-based diet. But yeah, if I even, my wife's like, hey, and you get all sensitive, right? So people will not be sensitive about these fire-related being confronted about fire-related realities. And I'm glad to see some of the nonprofits step in. I'm actually humbled at the quality of the conversations that are happening in some of the nonprofit realms. That's right, because then that de-escalates, right? The minute an agency shows up to tell everybody how it's going to be, everybody goes, well, you're not my agency. You're not in charge of me.
Right.
You don't have jurisdiction here. But nonprofits, so I actually think it's a lot of these softer skills, Steve. I think leaders have to care for people, but they also got to be good communicators. They have to think about how they're sharing risk, and not, if people in a given county, community, whatever, really understood their risk, like in their bones,
Yep.
I think they would act differently. But I think they're, but you can't, if you visualize it to somebody, I think then people go, oh man, I'm red or I'm purple or I'm whatever color my structure is. I need to take action and do something. And then communities mobilize communities, in my opinion. And so I think once you tip a community into action, then there's no stopping them. You know how many communities showed up in Washington for support after they lost thousands or tens of thousands of structures? All the time. And there's nothing I could do in the Forest Service to support community redevelopment. Well, the Commerce Department could come in, and these different agencies could have come in, like a whole of government approach, but it was really, really a challenge. So I think thinking from the security angle, to your point, is important, because we are an open society and we pride ourselves on that. But boy, it's a vulnerability. But I would rather have that than a totalitarian. Right? I'd rather it's as messy as democracy.
You might get both. Who knows?
I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Robert, thanks so much for joining me today. Absolutely fascinating chatting with you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We got Robert Baird here, bringing decades of wisdom to the fire space. Thanks for joining us on the Fire Break. Thanks you all for listening and watching. You should really be watching, because when you get guys this good looking, it's a shame to just listen, right? And we're sponsored by Team Wildfire. Thanks so much, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Steve.